So there's so much that can be measured that actually just hides a lot of things. You know, if you think about a curtain on a stage in the theatre, you've got all of these things going on behind the scenes, and you can paint a picture that looks really nice, but actually there's so much kind of like chaos and frantic stuff that's happening behind. But it's just all about how organizations present themselves. So yeah, your question was, how does this demographic data represent individuals? I think the honest answer is that it doesn't.
It doesn't. So how do you, are we then saying, on the one hand, that face value sort of sounds like data collection is a waste of time, which we know it isn't. Yeah. So, a top line, it's like, why are you collecting that? Forget it. It's pigeonholing people. And but obviously, loads and loads of companies do that, including sort of HR and web. What is the purpose of that, apart from obviously to track how they move through the world? In terms of in a company, you know, getting their ages of all their staff and demographics of their staff, or gender, or whatever it might be. Why bother?
Yeah, it's a really great question. There's so much, ironically, data out there talking about how organizations who use data are more profitable, they're more successful at achieving their goals. And I don't disagree with that. I fully agree with that. You already know, it's already been firmly established that I absolutely love data.
Yes.
But the challenge that I see is that we use these kind of traditional methods to understand what's going on, and we use it as like a collective in society, in business, in industries, to say we should collect this information because it will help us understand more. I don't disagree with that, but I think the question really is, how do we collect data better? How do we collect it in a way more intentional way, so that rather than just collecting masses of data as a just in case, or well, we're doing this just because everyone else is,
Yeah.
then we can move forward and say, well, we need this data because that will help us in our organization to understand what's going on. And actually, kind of past inclusion, that can have an environmental impact as well, because it's really, really environmentally expensive to store so much data. So if you can be more
Oh, I hadn't
intentional.
even thought about that. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
right. Because these servers, something is in the cloud, but it's not, it still exists in a physical server somewhere.
Yeah, and
And
the
we have
massive
these
data center. Yeah, of course.
huge, huge ones that take so much energy. So if we're storing additional redundant information, then actually that can have an impact. And, it might just be a small thing, but if you're a large company, that can actually have a massive impact.
So when you go into a company who is storing data on a vast scale, or on a vast scale by comparison of their size or whatever,
Yeah.
what is your first kind of port of call? You go in and say, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is actually for me not to start with the data, which may feel a bit counterintuitive, but really is to understand why. Like, what is the reason for your organization existing? What is the reason for your team existing? And that can happen at different levels. So, in a smaller company, it's much easier to go in and say, what's your whole purpose? We can see you've got 10 or 15 people here. What is everyone doing? But when you get to 10 or 15,000 people, how does that exercise scale? And obviously, it's much harder, but it's about understanding, what does your organization exist for, what's its purpose, how do you know that you're doing that correctly, by measuring things like KPIs, so key performance indicators,
Yeah.
and kind of moving forward then to say, okay, that's the first pillar. You wouldn't have any of the data in the next step without that. But now we're moving into the data space to say, well, what do you have available to you? What do you have that feels like it's very well used, or often is the case that actually a lot of the data is there but
And it
not
is
being
being
used
used.
properly?
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
more
and people
that's
feel
more common.
frustrated. Yeah, exactly. And so it's those sorts of things where you're starting to say, okay, here's what you already have, here's what you're missing, here's how we can reframe some of this stuff, here's how we actually just need to get rid of a load of this stuff because it's no longer necessary, which
Yeah.
is nice because that brings in things like GDPR around having intentional data use as well. And then this last part, which is really the people of data experience, is about saying, okay, you've got all these people, you've got all these stakeholders. How do we make sure that all of those people are represented by the data that supports your business? And for it not to be in any other order, because I can't start being inclusive without understanding what data you have. Understanding the context of your data is really hard without understanding, why does your business even exist?
Yeah, and also, why do you need that? What relevance is that data specifically to the day-to-day running? It's
Yeah,
interesting. I mean, the reality is now you pretty much can't sign up for anything without giving, I mean, everything about your life away. It's like, I'm only trying to buy
yeah,
something on Amazon, and
yeah.
I'm having to say how many dependents I've got, and I know that I'm being extreme about it, but is there any worth in collecting that data? Is there a way to use that effectively? And what is an example of that?
Yeah, I think the traditional examples are really in marketing. So thinking about profiling individuals against a larger group to say, well, these types of people tend to buy these types of products. So, for example, someone who's buying kids' toys or baby grows maybe, and also buying bottles and also buying, prams, also buying those sorts of things. That feels like
They
that's a
just like
new
kids.
parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that feels like you would then know, okay, within 3 months, we want to start advertising books because, that kid's gonna start being more interested in books, and there's this typical path that you can
Feels so
follow
hoodwinked, yeah.
using all this data. But I think the challenge in all of that is actually there's changes that occur. There's certain things that can happen where that person's no longer a parent, right? And
Yeah,
that's the stuff where you want the opportunity to be able to update your data to say, actually, your data that is collected, the data that is had and stored about you, to say, actually, this is no longer relevant to me. And I think we have started to see that, with some of the supermarkets and some of the other places saying, do you want to receive emails about Mother's Day, Father's Day, because people who have, suffered losses or maybe don't have good
yeah.
relationships, whatever, can end up
It's painful then
missing
to
out.
receive those things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so much deeper set. It is just an email, or it's just a message that comes through in your inbox, but the I know we both touched our heart earlier. I think the
Yeah.
implications of that can be much deeper.